This is the Comics Alternative, on location and talking with creators at Small Press Expo 2016, Part 1. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Comics Alternative on Location. I'm Derek, one of the two guys with PhDs talking about comics. And on this episode, we're going to be talking with creators who attended Small Press Expo 2016. But before we get into those conversations, we want to let all of you know that this episode of the Comics Alternative on Location is brought to you by the great folks at Discount Comic Book Service. Go to their website, dcbservice.com, for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. There, you're going to find all DC, Marvel, Image, and Dark Horse titles at 40% off of the cover price if you pre-order. For all of the other publishers, you'll find that those discounts are 20 to 35% off of the cover price. And every single month, you're going to find some incredible specials. Sometimes those specials may be at 45% off cover price, sometimes at 50% off cover, but many times you can find discounts that are more impressive than that. In fact, if you go there right now, you're going to find books by some of the creators that we talked to on this On Location episode. For example, you can find Ted Stearn's Fuzz and Pluck, Splitsville, at 35% off the cover price, as well as Ulises Fariñas' amazing Forest Trade paperback at 35% off of the cover price. You definitely can't beat the specials at Discount Comic Book Service. Go to their website, dcbservice.com, for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. And after you do get your comics there, please be sure to send them an email and tell them that the two guys with PhDs sent you. This is going to be the first of a three-part on-location interview series of conversations that we had with a variety of creators at Small Press Expo 2016. Much as we've done over the past couple of years, at least one of the Comics Alternative co-hosts attends Small Press Expo in Bethesda, Maryland, and there talks with a variety of different artists, writers, and publishers, and then we bring those conversations to you, our dear listeners. This year, both I and Andy Wolverton attended Small Press Expo, and on this show, you're going to be hearing conversations with John Martz, Jay Hosler, Blue Delliquanti, the people from Magnetic Press, Ulises Fariñas and Storme Smith, Ted Stearn, Emma Glaze, Daryl Seitchik, and Sean O'Neill. Let me just say as a way of introduction that the sound quality of some of these interviews are going to vary. Sometimes the conversations will have a lot of ambient noise, and sometimes they will not. There are some of these interviews that we conducted on the floor of the ballroom at Small Press Expo, and then on a few occasions I was able to talk with creators in a much more quiet place, so you can't even hear the people around. But we have a number of conversations to share with you, so let's go ahead and get to those. I'm here with John Martz at Small Press Expo 2016. His new book, Bert's Way Home, just came out from Koyama Press. John, how you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thank you very much.
Yes. Now, you're tabling with the Koyama folk upstairs, and we're at a little quieter place, so it's not as chaotic here as it is up on the floor of the Small Press Expo. Now, this book has just come out. You say it was released this past Tuesday?
Yep. Yes, it came out, just this week. So this is its festival debut.
Okay. Well, I want to talk about Bert's Way Home, but before that, let's talk about an earlier work of yours, because it's rather timely, nominated for an Ignatz Award, and those awards will be given this evening, and that is Be Good. Yes. And that is more pamphlet or mini-comic version, and I've read it, but for our listeners who may not be familiar with Be Good, how would you describe it to them?
That's a good question. It's a very short, little mini-comic, self-contained story It features a character that I had in a previous comic called Gold Star, and I liked drawing him, and I thought, well, I'll just make another. That book won an Ignatz, so I thought, well, maybe I'll try that again, and sure enough, it got nominated. So we'll see what happens. But it is in the previous book in Gold Star. It's about a character who is accepting an award, and people who read it, especially in the comics community, assume that the character is a cartoonist and is accepting an award for cartoons. But there's nothing in that book that says that what the award is for. There's nothing in the book that says that character is a cartoonist. And in my mind, he wasn't a cartoonist. And so I decided I would make another book with this character to sort of explain who I think he is. And he's not a cartoonist. He is a graphic designer, which I studied graphic design. So it's sort of a book about design and what design means to me, and also what just sort of about the personality types of people who get into design, because there's all sorts of self-importance, I think, that comes with graphic design, and coming out of that world, I'm very familiar with those types of people, and I used to run a blog called Drawn, and so I made this character a podcaster, a graphic design podcaster, and I thought it had some sort of similarities to having a blog about comics. It's sort of a thinly veiled version of myself, this character who has a podcast about graphic design, and he's not me, but he's sort of a version of myself if I was a worse person. So he's sort of a character who's a graphic designer who is full of a lot of self-importance, and not really seeing what design could be.
Well, one of the things that captured my attention immediately about Be Good is the podcasting part, right? And we don't learn until we're into the story that he actually does have a podcast. But then I learned that he has a podcast about design, which I find curious because in one of the courses I teach at my university, it's online usability and design. So I was thinking as I read this, okay, in what ways might I be able to work this into my curriculum next semester? So you do have a background in design, although not podcasting, but right. Blogging.
But blogging, yeah. And I think, obviously there's there's some similarities between blogging and podcasting. It's sort of anyone can do it. It's sort of a very self-made broadcast medium where you can talk about, the subjects that interest you, like having a podcast about comics. And I had a blog about comics. So, yeah, podcasting in terms of putting into a comic makes more sense than a blog, because you can have characters talking. And there's as you know, like in the beginning of this little story, there's some fish that are talking to themselves, and you're at the beginning of the story, you're not sure what their situation is, and then it becomes apparent that they are fish in an aquarium within the room where the podcast is being recorded, and so their worldview is based on the things that they hear in this guy's podcast, and he's a bit of a blowhard, so their worldview is skewed, and that sort of idea stemmed from, I had this notion of what if there was the seed for the story was that what if there was a future civilization, a sort of a Planet of the Apes style, where humanity is destroyed and all that has remained is like some archival podcast, of this guy's views on what's important, and would a society, use that information and build a religion out of it, the way we have with old scriptures and things, and obviously it turned into something a little more frivolous in terms of the mini comic, but that's where the seed came from.
Now, you were mentioning that even though these aren't autobiographical comics, you use parts of your own life to weave into the stories in Be Good and then your previous work. Now, Bert's Way Home, if I can transition to this recent book, is quite different, although I guess one could say that, maybe there's something about your own life that you've woven into this story. Is that the case at all?
A little bit. Not in any... this character is an orphan. I come from a big family of lots of siblings and two parents, so I'm not an orphan. But the relationship that this character has with this elderly woman is based on my relationship with my grandmother. and the apartment building that they live in is modeled exactly on my grandmother's apartment building. So there's sort of, I think I tend to sort of put that sort of stuff into everything I do.
And one of the things that struck me about Bert's Way Home is that you shift perspective, in that the woman that Bert is staying with, what was her name? Lydia. That we begin with her perspective, even though we don't know exactly this is her at first. But then I guess you could say the core of the story itself, outside of her voice moments, which are interspersed throughout, is Bert's perspective and what he's doing. So you have these two different ways of looking at his situation, which I think makes that story so much more poignant than it could be if it was just Bert's perspective.
Yeah, I tend to, I like stories that sort of flop between perspectives, which I did that in Be Good, and even Gold Star it's two different timelines that it sort of flops between. I think it just provides me as a writer with some structure to build a story out of. So starting with like the seed of this story, which is, could I tell the story of an orphan who has some, specialness to him in the way that is you see in things like Superman. He's an orphan who's got some special powers. Batman, orphan with special powers. Harry Potter, he's an orphan with special powers. All these characters that are orphans with special powers. Spider-Man. Thinking, well, what is it about that story that's interesting, and can I do something about that? Flip it on its head. Do my take on that sort of thing. And then that's when I thought, well, what if you don't really hear Aunt May's story in Spider-Man or Alfred's story in Batman, or all these people who take the orphans in, and it also came from wondering what if these origin stories of these superhero characters were made up? Like, what if this is the orphan is making the story up to sort of cope with whatever trauma has led him to become an orphan.
So when you originally conceived of Bert's Way Home, did you know you wanted to start with Lydia's perspective, the caregiver?
No, originally it was just going to be a straight. I thought I would just do a story about a kid who goes on some intergalactic adventure, and then the more I started writing and figuring out what his situation was, the intergalactic adventure seemed uninteresting. It didn't seem as interesting as his predicament of being a lonely kid and dealing with loneliness through creativity.
Now, I want to ask you a bit about the intended readership for Bert's Way Home, because when I read Bert's Way Home, I got a different sense of who the reader might be for this, or could possibly be, maybe it's a different way of putting it, than the Be Good mini comic. That Be Good is a little more mature in the sense of adult. I mean, not that there's anything explicit in there. Right. This, though, is something that I would think would be very appropriate for younger readers, because it deals with a predicament that many would be able to empathize with. And so I'm wondering, did you have this in mind? Did you want to write a narrative where, certain younger readers maybe could find some solace in the story?
Well, it was definitely made for a younger reader, yeah, but with no real purpose. I'm not trying to specifically communicate with people who are orphans or lonely, or it's just that's the story that came out, and it was intended for a younger audience. I don't know what specific age range it's for. I just sort of, made the story that I thought was made the book that I thought the story needed, and let the publisher and the distributor figure out who it's for.
Yeah. So with not only this book, but your other writings, I mean, do you have an audience in mind, or do you just write and then audience will come after?
Yeah, pretty much. I do sort of switch between kid stuff and adult stuff. As you say, like, not explicit adult stuff, but just kids don't want to read about design theory. But that's stuff I think about. So if I can put it into a comic, I will, and then worry about audience later.
So what kind of projects do you have on the horizon now? Now that Bert's Way Home is now out.
Yeah, well, I'm always writing stuff. I've got, I don't know what the next proper comic book will be, but there are some, there's some things. I like doing science fiction. It provides an interesting structure to talk about various subjects. I was a big Star Trek fan, and so Star Trek, it is probably the best example of using science fiction to tell moral tales or stories about social issues or anything really. It's probably some sort of science fiction based something coming soon. I'm not sure what it'll be quite yet.
It's funny because with the 50th anniversary of Star Trek just the other week, we were watching a lot of the original Star Trek episodes in my household because my wife is a gigantic Trek fan. So, yeah, I was rewatching a number of those. And you're right, they do deal with issues in ways that, many sci-fi narratives today don't, at least as obviously.
Yeah, Star Trek is very, it's sort of interesting to see new Star Trek come out and try to, I feel like the new Star Trek movies, and there's a new show coming out, and it's going to be interesting to see how Star Trek has evolved, because it's the first series and then Next Generation. It's a very broad show. Like, it's very, it's sort of a ridiculous concept, and it's almost comical how like this team of people in their pajamas in a spaceship go from one weird planet to the next, just solving problems, and it's silly, but I think that broadness, that silliness, allows for a variety of interpretations of stories in a way that a very realistic setting doesn't. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with the new Star Trek.
Well, John, good luck tonight with the Ignatz Awards. It's up for, what category is it? The Be Good nominated for?
It's a weird category. It's outstanding comic, and it's like up against like a Dan Clowes graphic novel, which is I don't know, like a mini comic up against a proper graphic novel by one of the greats. It's a little weird.
Yeah, sometimes those categories, and not just for the Ignatz, I scratch my head over, and I know what they're doing, right? Because it could be in the mini comic category, it could be the best story or the outstanding comic. Where they decide to put it, though, sometimes is a little curious. And so you're up against Klaus.
Yeah. So I and a number of other, like Kim Deitch and Sam Bosma, and I can't remember everyone else, but it's a pretty interesting category, and I don't expect to take the award home, but it's nice to be in that company.
Well, John, thank you very much for talking for the Comics Alternative, and I hope you have a nice SPX.
Thank you very much. This was nice.
Okay, we are at the Small Press Expo. I'm really, really delighted to see Jay Hosler again. We spoke last year. Jay, we talked a little bit about Last of the Sandwalkers. It's great to see you here again.
It's good seeing you again, too. First face, too. That's the first one I recognized.
The very first face. And
right.
I saw his table, and I thought, well, I don't see him, so I'll come back. And then you came over. So
I was buying Tom Gould books from Drawn and Quartered. So.
I don't blame you at all. Well, Jay, we were talking before we got on the mic about the Last of the Sandwalkers, and if you remember, I'm a public librarian.
I do.
And I've put this in the hands of a lot of people, and they're very excited about it. And I wanted to share that with you to let you know that in the library world, Last of the Sandwalkers is a big hit.
Librarians have been huge for our books from the very beginning. I mean, I think we dropped Clan Apis into 200 bags for a pre-conference at a Master Librarians Conference, and sales, I think, doubled.
Wow.
Yeah, and I mean, what's really exciting is that I start to have kids at a lot of the shows, or some of the shows I go to in different places, who say, oh, that book, Clan Apis, or that book, Sandwalk Adventures, I read that from my library. Yeah. And, for me, I grew up walking 7 blocks to the library almost every day during the summer, and the idea that books are getting passed around, maybe not, they don't have to be purchased, right? I mean, I just want the books in the hands of kids, because ultimately, you just want them to get excited about bugs, because I'm weird.
I think a lot of kids are with you because they're excited about that same thing, sure. too. Well, I was going to tell you that a lady came into the library not too long ago, and she said, I want any graphic novels you have on science. And that's typically not a question we get every day. And I said, let me take you over here. And your book was the very first one that I put in her hands.
Oh, wow.
And I thought she was going to read the entire thing at the library, which would have been fine. But she was very excited about it.
Oh, I'm really glad to hear that. Yeah, my wife is a middle school teacher, and she actually bought a set for class to do literacy activities because she has to do science literacy as well. What I love hearing from her is that, she's got some at-risk kids that have trouble reading and have actually found the comics that she has in class as a vehicle. She's got one kid who, we're four weeks into the semester, he's already read everything I've ever written and a lot of the science comics that I've donated to her classroom.
Wow,
so,
that is awesome.
It is, because that's what you want, right? You want kids reading comics again. I mean, it used to be, we still see the umpteenth article about comics aren't for kids anymore.
Yeah.
I'm waiting for the article that says comics can be for kids again, because it's sort of drifted from that a little bit.
Yeah, it really has. And that leads me to another question that's somewhat controversial. But this same lady said to me, it would be great if we could have like a little mini conference or something about writing science books for kids. And I said, that's great. And she said, what we really need is a platform or a program about writing science books that meet the Common Core standards.
Right.
Have you run into that at all with this book or any of your other books?
I haven't yet, but I'm working on a grant actually to come up with something that would allow us to generate short comics to address specific Common Core items that could then be available for free on the internet. So I'm seeing all of this filtered through my wife's eyes. We live in sort of a small town in central Pennsylvania, not a lot of money for materials, and the idea, and having gone to certain inner city schools in D.C. for programs, I mean, if we could set up a program where all you need is to have the teacher have internet access and the ability to download maybe a black and white comic. If you could start having comics that hit those Common Core ideas, the things that, as my wife says, just try to make something useful every once in a while. I get that comment around the house.
Can't escape it. Huh?
I can't. It's a fair comment, though. But I think that's one of the things that I would like to see do too. The balancing act is, if you just, there has to be a certain quality, in my opinion, to the comic. In other words, hitting a core value is important, but if you really want the kids to read it, there has to be a pretty compelling story component, and that's sort of the balancing act that we struggle with sometimes, because educators, and being one myself, I can sort of see this, you kind of push for more content, right? And so the educator side of me can see that. The artist side of me is like, no, because that's not really, except for the kids who don't need the help, they're the ones that dive into the content. Like, I'm the type of person, give me a textbook for a Friday night and I'm happy, right? But most people aren't that way. Most people have to be drawn into material that they're not familiar with or potentially intimidated by, and the way we do that is give them story. Story is a comfortable thing. Stories with pictures, even better. Yeah. And so I think the balancing act that we have to take with science comics is that balancing act. Understanding we can't possibly say everything. But if we say something that people remember, that's the win, right? That's where you've succeeded.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of where my work has sort of gone in the last several years.
That's great. I know you got some other people here, but I just wanted to ask you really quickly about what you're working on now.
Well, I'm working on a story about a little bee named Kushi. And Kushi is a cartoon bee born into a colony of leafcutter ants. And she's a sister, she's a member of the colony, but she can't really talk to anybody. The story is about her meeting someone she can finally talk to and having to accept some things about that friend that sort of go against the stories that she's told herself her whole life. And so it's a story about the biology of these leafcutters, but also friendship and acceptance and diversity, essentially.
Sounds great. Well, I hope we get to see it soon.
Me too.
Jay, thanks so much for talking with us today.
Yeah, it was good talking to you.
I'm at the table of Blue Delliquanti, and if that name sounds familiar to our listeners, is because a few months ago, Sean and I discussed her webcomic, Oh Human Star, and we really loved the comic. Now it's out in book form. I don't know if it was at the time of our discussion, but Blue, how is SPX going for you?
SPX is amazing as always. It's one of my favorite shows, and I look forward to it every year.
Okay, so answer my question. When did a hard copy of Oh Human Star, the first volume, come out?
It would have been March of 2015.
So it was out when we discussed your webcomic. We just didn't, or at least I didn't know about that.
No problem. Yeah, I kickstarted it the fall of 2014, and I'm actually due to kickstart the next one this fall, so about every 2 years.
Okay, so you're doing the next volume with Kickstarter as well.
Yep.
So you've been going on for what, about a little over 2 years now?
4 years since I started.
4 years.
Since 2012.
Since 2012. Okay, well, how do you think the title has changed over time? In any different direction in character, story?
You know, the main skeleton of the story has remained intact. I've always known how the story would end. As things have gone on, I have become more attached to the secondary characters, and I found that I really wanted to see more of what they were up to, what they were like, what their role played in this larger world I was building. So it got fleshed more in that department, while the general primary storyline continued more or less as I imagined it would.
Why do you think you became more involved in the lives of the secondary characters?
I really like them, and I feel like, especially there's a secondary character named Lucille, who is also a entrepreneur. She specializes in prosthetics as opposed to artificial intelligence, which is the main character's focus. And I found like those two realms play off each other very well, like the mind versus the body, the physical versus the mental. So it was really interesting having a complementary point of view for some of these story events and how you perceive the world you work in. And so I really like to see what she was up to.
Now, for our listeners who may not have heard that show that we did a few months back, the webcomic show, in a nutshell, describe Oh Human Star.
Oh Human Star follows an inventor named Alistair Sterling, who was on the cusp of revolutionizing the world of robotics and artificial intelligence before his untimely death. And the story opens 16 years after his death, when he finds himself woken up in a robot body that matches his old one exactly, and now he has to get his life back together with his former, quote-unquote, huge air quotes, work partner and the robot he's raising as a child.
And one of the things that strikes me about Oh Human Star is the fact that you deal with issues of identity and identity formation, and working with a genre, a sci-fi genre, you're able to do that in ways that you couldn't if this were a much more realistic narrative.
Yeah, I feel like there are lots of possibilities when it comes to the world of cartooning, and especially the world of robotics. I feel like it's much easier to create a humanized, really sympathetic-looking character who is a robot, whose expressions may not change, but something that may seem uncanny or a little disturbing in the real life is much more appealing and charming, I feel, in the world of comics. I think of, the videos that the Boston Dynamics company puts out of these adorable, four-legged robots that are, raised to be pack mules, but they're just the sweetest thing. And I love them, but people are freaked out by them. And it's I feel like in comics, that's a better bridge to gap and to find non-human characters appealing.
So what is it about robotics that drew you to bring it into your premise?
I have always personally been really fascinated with robotics. I found that as I wanted to work on a story with LGBT characters, especially transgender characters, trans readers and authors have always been really been inspired by robotics and cyberpunk. There are lots of shared influences, like the Wachowski sisters and other creators. They are always really drawn to robotics and cyberpunk, so there's that shared literary canon almost that's really fun to draw inspiration from.
So now, in terms of the webcomic, which are coming out in various volumes in hard copy, do you have at least a rough timeline about how much longer it may go on, or do you feel more loosely that it goes when it goes?
I anticipate it being finished in the next 4 to 5 years, God willing, and the creek don't rise. I have 3 volumes planned out to wrap up the story. So I am a little over the halfway point in the online catalog as it is.
Okay, so you say about 3 or 4 more years?
Yeah, 3 or 4 or 5 more years, if I get busy.
So that's like a 7 to 8 year run for a webcomic. That's quite significant.
It is. Yeah, it's one of those things where it would be nice to not have it drag into my 30s. Like, it seems like it would be a nice project to bookend my 20s, my early comics career. But I have always been really attached to these characters, and I love writing them and working with them. So it's nice to have them live in my head for many years.
Now, is it living in your head for many years that is one of the draws in doing webcomics? Because it strikes me that those who work with webcomics can do it for a much longer haul than for someone who sets out and says, I want a hard copy, more traditional book kind of narrative that I'm going to create. Is that one of the things that drew you to the platform of webcomics?
There's positives and negatives to both of those formats. I feel like with webcomics, you can work at your own pace. There are fewer gatekeepers to moderate what content you're putting out into the world. And I feel like people are really loyal to their webcomic of choice, no matter how glacial the pace of updates may be. I feel like there's accessibility benefits to both formats. It's very different. I like working in both. I'm looking forward to working in a traditional graphic novel format in the next year or so. But, they both have advantages.
So in the more traditional graphic novel format outside of Oh Human Star, you mean?
Yeah, exactly.
So, have you started any work there, or is all your energy now on Oh Human Star?
I have. I've actually just finished the pitching a comic to Iron Circus Press. Iron Circus Comics is a indie publisher. I am doing a graphic novel called Meal through them that is about a young aspiring chef who is working in a restaurant that specializes in insect cuisine. So it's one of those shorter stories I'd love to tell. I'm really passionate about it, but it's one of those things where it's like a one and done. Writing it all as one graphic novel would be a good change of pace for me, I think.
As opposed to carrying a community of characters out for a longer narrative.
Yeah.
Now, in that longer narrative, Oh Human Star, how much does, let's say, reader feedback and response play into your storytelling?
I try not to let it affect my narrative that I already have planned. However, it's interesting to see feedback on what people are expecting in terms of the mystery that I've sort of created in the core story. It's interesting to see how people's reaction to characters changes over time as more information is revealed, who becomes more or less sympathetic. And, I get really attached to the characters, so it's fun seeing people be very passionate and attached to them too, and hear their feedback. So in a ways it's really rewarding, but also exhausting.
Yeah. Do you ever get any reaction that rubs you a little the wrong way?
Oh, definitely. There have definitely been people who, have short-sighted opinions about the characters or how they're behaving because they're only seeing, the first step, their action without seeing the consequences that I'll incorporate in the story maybe a year down the road. Right. So, it's one of those things where I just have to remember that I have the full picture and they don't.
Okay. So you talked about the book Meal.
Yeah.
That's going to be you just signed a deal with. Now, when will the Kickstarter for Volume 2 of Oh Human Star begin?
Literally beginning of October, so in a week or so.
Okay. So as people are listening to this interview, they should go ahead and bookmark Kickstarter and be prepared to search for the second volume kickstarted of Oh Human Star.
That's right. I'll also be kickstarting in that Kickstarter a reprint of Volume 1 because in 2 years I am nearly out of the first run of Volume 1. It's been very good. It's been very good year of sales for me.
Well, good. And there'll be a reward level where someone can get both the new one and the first volume?
Precisely.
Okay. That's good for me to keep in mind, definitely.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, Blue, thank you for taking the time and talking with the Comics Alternative. Good luck with the SPX.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your time.
And you guys are with Magnetic Press, right? And
Magnetic Press.
Okay, and I'll let you guys introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Ulises Fariñas. I'm a writer of Judge Dredd and artist of Judge Dredd, Mega City Zero, and Gamma, and a bunch of other books.
Cool.
I'm Storme Smith, publisher for BuenoBooks.com. BUNO.
Great. Well, thank you guys for being a part of the Comics Alternative. And I told you, I think earlier, that we do a young readers edition of the Comics Alternative, pretty much anything up till teens. And what can you tell us about this book, Light?
Light is like a real simple, just hero's journey type character. He has a map. He's looking for these crystals to bring light back into the world, and at the end, the whole world explodes with color. So it's a very simple story that's just done with just art, no words. I think it's really beautiful.
And it was just nominated for a National Book Award in the Philippines, and I think he's the only person in the category, so I have a feeling he's got it.
Yeah.
I hope it's in the bag then. Well, I was just looking through it, and I was noticing how like you mentioned, there's so much color in it. It starts out very, very dark, and the colors are just amazing. Can you tell us a little bit about Rob and how his work?
I think Rob is a fantastic artist, illustrator, and storyteller. And actually, me and Rob are working on a book right now for another publisher.
Great. Now, do you guys publish other things that are all ages, or is this kind of a departure?
We are going to be publishing a book called Claudia and Rex that will also be all ages. And our book, Guardian Force, is kind of like a Power Rangers Cutaways book. And that doesn't really have any dialogue in it, so it's default all ages.
That's good. Yeah. Well, listen, guys, thanks so much for talking with us, and we hope to hear from you again soon.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
I'm here with Ted Stearn. His new book coming out from Fantagraphics is The Moolah Tree. Ted, welcome to the Comics Alternative.
Thanks for having me.
Now, this is a Fuzz and Pluck story, and I got to know the Fuzz and Pluck characters, I guess, through 00 and then through various volumes of Mome, but also you had that series, I think it was 5-issue series, Fuzz and Pluck Splitsville. So this is a book that's different from, let's say, your early strips that were in other publications. You collected them in that first book. Splitsville came out in 5 different issues. This, though, you didn't serialize, and I'm wondering what the decisions were surrounding that.
I think, honestly, serialism it doesn't sell, because if you don't come out with it regularly every 6 months, every year, people just can't follow it. So really the trend now is to come out with an entire book. So even though everything in all 3 of my books are serialized, you really don't have to read the previous one. It's nice if you can, but you can pick up number 1, number 2, or number 3, and I'm hoping that you can just pretty much follow the story on its own. So that's the problem with serialization, and I think other people have had that problem, and that's why you see more collected books and fewer staple. It just doesn't sell anymore.
In your Fuzz and Pluck stories, you do make it easier for the reader, because I know in both Splitsville and this new book, The Moolah Tree, you give a brief description of who these characters are, where they met, and roughly where we last saw them. And then we get to the story, which, as you pointed out, stands on its own. And that's what The Moolah Tree is like.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I really want it to be easier on the reader. I don't want them to feel lost at all. So, I just want them to enjoy it. And that's why I made it.
I remember reading some of the early parts of The Moolah Tree in issues of Mome. How much of The Moolah Tree had been serialized either in Mome or elsewhere?
I think it was just Mome. That's it. After Mome stopped, I just said I'm not going to do anything until I get out a whole story, and I think that's fine. One reason I liked serialization is it forces me to get it done. So it does. I do go a little slower when I don't have a publishing date, but I did decide that I was just not going to show anything and then just put it all in one big explosive book. And I think, there are a lot of good reasons to do that. People kind of forget who you are a little bit because it's been gone for so long, but they do get the whole story at once, and it's nice.
You mentioned that you don't feel the pressure of the deadline near as much when you don't serialize it. And I'm wondering, in holding on to the material until the entire book is done, what are some other possible drawbacks for an artist?
Drawbacks? Well, time, and also just... I'm sorry, I don't quite understand the question.
Instead of serializing it, but holding everything until it's ready and the entire story is done, what are the potential drawbacks of that? Obviously you don't have income coming in from the earlier installments.
I think the best way to answer that is I really, really, really get to examine everything, and I can look back and change something. I can take my time. I really want it to be something that lasts and is really carefully crafted. And when I do that with a story and drawings and everything, and the whole visual aspect of it, I can see the whole thing, and so I feel more confident putting it out. I think serialization has its drawbacks because, I might want to change something. I want to, the story, I really got to work with I tried to make the story as strong as I could. And by actually taking my time and doing it that way, I'm fine with it. I'm not in a huge hurry. When you hurry, you're going to have regrets.
And I was wondering, because when I was reading The Moolah Tree, I thought that it was a more cohesive story than, let's say, in your earlier books, but I wondered if that's just my experience not seeing it serialized. Do you feel that it is a more cohesive, less installment kind of narrative?
Yes, and I think it's also just my learning curve. I'm more sensitive to certain storytelling things that I wanted to put into my book. At the same time, I think all of the stories, hopefully, are unpredictable. You never really know what's going to happen next, but you want to find out. And that's the ideal for me. So that makes my stories perhaps less traditional in that you don't have this arc of, the characters doing this and then they get in trouble and then they learn from it and they move on. I like to keep it unpredictable. I want the reader to really be interested in the story and have a real page turner, but I don't want them to know the ending. It really has to be kind of up in the air.
Well, for those of our listeners who haven't yet had the joy of reading a Fuzz and Pluck story, how would you describe your characters to the uninitiated?
My characters are a teddy bear and a pluck chicken. And they both have double entendres. Pluck is very kind of irascible, and pluck means, of course, also to have bravery and to have, moxie and all that, and that's definitely what he has. He's got a chip on his shoulder because he lost his feathers, and, as a bald man, I can relate to that. And Fuzz is, a teddy bear, kind of childlike, and very innocent, and he's fuzzy in the brain a little bit. So, I do have they're kind of opposites, perhaps, related to my personality, but that's all in hindsight.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask if you see these characters as different parts of your psyche. Do you see them that way?
I think that's inevitable. If an author is being honest, they have to be. But at the same time, what makes, hopefully it's successful and makes people, want to read it is actually relating to the character. So even though it might be about me or about my, based on certain things in my life or in my mind, I think I really like to share and make sure that I think people want to relate to it, so hopefully they do relate to it. Otherwise, it's just about me, so I don't want that. The whole point is sharing.
Okay, so you've described it as a plucked chicken and a teddy bear. Listeners may think, this sounds like a book for young readers. But would you consider the Fuzz and Pluck stories for younger readers?
Yes, and a lot of people think it's like there's no swearing, there's no, well, maybe damn, but there's no blatantly sexual content. I really do want it to be for kids and adults. I think some adults might have a little bit of a problem with some of the violence, but I think wouldn't make sense because so many, there's so many shows for kids that have violence. So I think we have to define violence. But anyway, I'm okay. I want kids to read it, but I want adults to read it too. And I would it's kind of like the Alice books, Alice Through the Looking Glass or something like that, where I hope that an adult can find it rich enough to see the layers there that I put in there, but also a kid can enjoy it just for the adventure.
Is the marketing behind both the new book and in your past Fuzz and Pluck books, was that targeting younger readers to some degree? Do you know?
I don't think I could because the publisher is Fantagraphics, and sometimes they had some really naughty stuff, and I would. It's hard because I've kind of painted myself into a corner, but I'm okay with that because I think it's an interesting territory. I would like to see the barriers between kids' books and adult books broken down a little bit. Like I said, there are layers to my book that I think adults can enjoy. A lot of things I'm saying, it's kind of like I'm asking questions. I'm just wondering things. I'm not being didactic. And I think a lot of children's books are too didactic. So there's no message there, but there are a lot of questions and wondering about anything.
Okay, well, so tell me about the genesis of these characters. Where did you come up with them?
I came up with them when I did a comic for David Mazzucchelli. He had a comic called Rubber Blanket, and he wanted me to do a comic. I said I've never done one before, but I just did it anyway, and he printed it. That's how I started. I think it's really hard to figure out why you stick with some things and why you lose others. So I do a lot of doodles. I did a lot of playing around with different characters. And for some reason, I was attracted to them. Maybe I kind of thought of them, again in hindsight a little bit, as kind of like anti-hero, anti-Disney, anti-cliche. They were kind of like funky, weird answer to cute animals, if you can get that. I did think of them as kind of like in an underground way, in that I wanted to subvert and satirize cute animal stories.
But you don't do it in, let's say, an abrasive way where it becomes maybe sharply ironic to where it wouldn't be the kind of thing you would want to give a younger reader.
Right. Well, that's where I think the double meaning comes in, and that's what I want. So, like, if a kid reads it, they might read more on the surface, but an adult might see some irony or some what's the word? I don't know. Different onion layers of possibilities, and so that's what I like to play with, but I absolutely want it to be a great adventure book. I mean, I read Uncle Scrooge, and I just love those. Do they have all the layers that I'm thinking of? No, I'm sure not. But that's the kind of thing that I like because it's a good story, and you want to turn the pages. But at the same time, I want people to be able to go back and go, he's saying one thing and he's doing another, or he's saying this and he's answering back. What does that mean?
I like the way you described that. Adventure stories, let's say in the mold of an Uncle Scrooge or a Donald Duck, right? The Carl Barks stuff. Because maybe we can talk a little bit more deeply about the new book. When we last saw the characters Fuzz and Pluck, they were literally adrift on a ferry. And also, at least in the case of Pluck, trying to get away from that strange competition event that he got roped into. And so that's where Splitsville ended. And you literally pick up where you left off in this new book from Splitsville.
Well, everything that I'm writing about, and is pretty much based on ideas that I have, and I want to put the ideas into the book. For example, I think, the idea of a money tree, I was kind of surprised I couldn't find many stories on that. And it's kind of like Treasure Island in a way, is that everyone's looking for this treasure, but I wanted the treasure to be, a fun thing like that. But my point is that the money tree and the stories behind the money tree are something that anyone can read and get and enjoy, but I do have other aspects going on. For example, I'm very interested in paradoxes and dichotomies. You'll find them throughout the book. You'll find that I'm creating a story, and if you look for the extremes of certain subjects or certain issues, you'll find them. But they're hidden, and I'm not going to tell everybody because it's part of the story. To me, I want it to be inseparable from the story. It's not like something I pull out and go, well, this is about this issue, and this is about issue. No, it's just about, thinking about certain things. And money is one of them, definitely.
And, another thing I like about the Fuzz and Pluck stories is they're in certain ways like the classic picaresque tales, in that you have characters that have an event, just a series of events. Not that they necessarily learn anything from the things that they go through, the adventures that they have, but the fun is in them going from one adventure to the next. Do you see them in that way?
They're consistent characters. They appear in, they're infinitely going to go on. Because of that, you can't have a story arc where they change. Okay, so they do change. They come to some realizations, but there's nothing that changes the characters. Now, you'll find in this book, for example, and in Splitsville, there are other characters who do change. So they go through an arc of realizing something and moving on, and that's kind of a classic storytelling thing. And so I definitely do that, but it's not with these two, because these two...
They can't change. No, otherwise, you don't have Fuzz and Pluck.
Yeah, that's no fun. And it's like, that's very common. It's, as far as like the kind of adventure thing, I mean, if you read Don Quixote, one of the earliest novels, it is kind of like that. So the characters are carrying the story from one place to another, but it's how those characters react to different situations. That's story enough. You don't have to, have a story about doing this or doing that. It's just more about how are these characters going to react to this scenario, and that's the fun for me. So I come up with a scenario that I think is very interesting and fun for the reader as well as me, and so how do they? What happens when we drop them in? And certainly that's like real life. As far as story arcs, I think the serialization had something to do with that, because, I wanted a story arc, definitely. But I think in the first book, it was early, and I didn't know how it was going to end. I had no idea, because I was just starting. So the Splitsville, I definitely knew the ending. So you have to know how it's going to end, and then you go back and carry them through to the beginning.
And you had the same experience with the Moolah Tree. You knew where it was going to end.
You absolutely, well, in my opinion, you have to know. You have to at least know the penultimate ending. You have to know how it's going to, and then you fill in all the blanks before. But you have to know how it's starting and how it's ending, and then you can play with everything in between. But, that's process. That's just how you do it.
Now, you were telling me before I turned on the microphone that you finished the Moolah Tree, the writing of the Moolah Tree, last year, and we have the new book now. Have you been thinking of a next Fuzz and Pluck story, or the next Fuzz and Pluck stories, plural?
Yes, I will have another book out. God knows how long it's going to take me, but I have a story penciled out, and I just came up with the ending, because that's important. I had to know how it's going to end. So, and it's the same kind of thing. It's like they get dropped into a scenario in a situation, and, that's how they move on. And I guess you can make the analogy of, Karl Barks stories or something, and where Donald Duck never changes, but he's always in a new situation. I mean, I think if you need some kind of parallel, for that, I would say that's kind of true. That's kind of what I'm going for.
Do you have anything in the works that maybe is non-Fuzz and Pluck related?
I have a number of of short comics that I have done in the past that I would like to collect. I don't know whether it can be published or not, but I did a short story on the first Thanksgiving. I did a bunch of surreal comics that are less accessible than Fuzz and Pluck. And I also work full-time in animation. I draw storyboards for Rick and Morty and a show called Animals on HBO, and I've drawn Futurama, so that takes up a lot of my time is doing that. Animation has been a big influence, but it's it has kind of slowed me down.
I mean, but do you consider animation your day job?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
it has to be.
I mean, it has to slow you down. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's. I work with a lot of animators, and a lot of them just say, "Oh, I can't do it." And I'm like, "Hey, I did it. You can do it. If I did it, you can do it. Believe me." And so, I'm working on weekends and nights, and you make a lot of sacrifices, but it's so enjoyable to share something that I really want to share with other people, and I that's what motivates me, not so much any kind of notoriety or it's all about me, or I don't care about that, but to put a story out there that never existed before and bring it into existence like a baby. It's like a little thing that grows, and people enjoy it and look at it, and people you don't know look at it, and that's wonderful to me. I'm really very interested in what people in this story and the characters and giving birth to them, because no one else can. It's mine, and so I have a lot of control over it, and that's wonderful.
That's okay. I'm getting over a cold myself. Any plans on animated Fuzz and Pluck?
No, not right now. I feel like I'm almost too close to animation. I'm a storyboard artist, so I work in it all the time, and I'm tempted, but when you go into doing animation, it's like goodbye comics, because I can't do both. So it's like, I make a decision and I say I want to tell a long story that's fun, that's interesting, with lots to look at. And if I do that, I don't have time to do the animation. Now, if I do the animation, it's like maybe a year, maybe two of not doing that. So I'm kind of making a choice, So that's fine. Animation's different.
So you're at SPX. Where else? What other events will you be at to help promote the new book, The Moolah Tree?
I'll be in Columbus, so the CXC, Cartoon Crossroads. In between that and there, I have a book in France, the exact same book that will be premiering. So I'll be doing that. I'll have an exhibition there. I'll be doing some workshops. I'll be doing some lectures. I have a lot lined up in France. They love their comic books. So that's going to be an experience. I'm going in like a week. I'm going to go over there. I also have a signing in New York at Desert Island on September 23rd. So I guess I should do more signings, but it's hard to find the time.
No, well, you have a lot lined up in the weeks to come. But Ted, I want to thank you for taking the time and talking with me here at SPX, and good luck with the new book and the rest of the con.
Oh, sure. And thank you. I'm sorry we didn't get to talk about Kentucky, but that's all right. We can talk about other states.
Inside joke. Thanks a lot, Ted.
Thank you.
And I'm talking with Emma Glaze, who is one of the creators of Sightings. And Emma, what can you tell us about this book? I know it's a webcomic, right?
Yeah, it's available at sightings.com. It's essentially a story about a boy named Taffy, Tobias, but everyone calls him Taffy. He's sort of a loner. He's really confident in his own abilities. He loves cryptozoology, and he's convinced that Bigfoot exists and that he's the person to find him. So he goes out in the woods a lot, and he finds something that isn't Bigfoot, but is something a lot bigger, and adventures ensue. But it's fun, colorful, really bright, kind of funny story, and we're really excited to see it unfold. It should be pretty long, so we're looking forward to it.
So I know a lot of people that do webcomics is just webcomics, and some of them see print, some of them don't. What led you and Danny, to go ahead and start a print version?
Well, we really love comics and reading comics and the tangibility factor. And I have two little brothers who love comics too, and I really wanted them to be able to read it and follow up with it. So we just decided that we wanted to have it printed and for people to look through and kind of that tangible feeling. So once we have it done, it's going to be 3 volumes and compiled of about 20 chapters each. So we're really looking forward to that.
That is really cool.
Yeah.
So now if somebody wanted to read the webcomic, where would they go?
Sightings-comic.com. So it's sightings-comic.com with a dash between sightings and comic. Pretty easy to remember. But yeah, that's where they find it.
Well, great. Well, thanks so much for talking with us today.
Thank you so much. It's great to meet you.
You too.
Have a good SPX. Enjoy yourself. Thank you.
I'm here with Daryl Seitchik. She is the author of Exits, which has just come out from Koyama Press. Daryl, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Derek.
Now, we're here at SPX, and this is, I guess, is this the debut of Exits?
Yes, it is.
Yes. And so it's the first time many people will get to see Exits, and when I read a review copy of this the other week, that was my first exposure to your comics. And so one of the things I'd like to do is to ask you more about your work and maybe how Exits is representative or maybe not representative of the kind of comics that you do.
Before Exits, I mainly did semi-autobiographical comics. I did a strip called Missy. And Exits was a big stretch for me because it was my first exploration with fiction and also long format comics. Before that, I was mainly doing short strips. So it's really a giant detour from everything I've done before, and I no longer know what kind of comics I do.
Yeah, well, this would definitely qualify as non-autobiographical, although if you do have a life like this, it's really wild. Because this is a very fantastical work. Now, it's a way of getting into Exits. Give a quick synopsis of what is Exits about.
Exits is about a girl named Claire Kim who works at a mirror store, and she becomes invisible out of a sort of dissatisfaction with the world around her and her own place in it. And then I stopped drawing her a quarter of the way through the book, and she's invisibly exploring the city and her own psyche, and coming to all sorts of conclusions about herself and the world, and yeah.
So she starts off working in a mirror shop, and there's a reason why I'm asking this, but I'm curious. Why put her as a salesperson in a mirror shop?
Because I have my own personal experience in retail, and I often feel like I took from that. When you're selling something to someone, especially in this world, that didn't make any sense. But when you're selling something to someone, you're kind of they're looking for themselves in the object a lot of the times, and I wanted to reflect that in a very meta way through the mirror store.
Yeah. Because not only are the customers looking at themselves, but I mean, this book is all about Claire in the way that she sees herself, in the way that, of course, other people see her or don't see her as the book progresses.
And I wanted to show how objects and symbols don't ever fully contain their meaning or their the meaning we ascribe to them, and it extends to how people try to put themselves in a box, and Claire felt like she kind of grew out of her own skin. So she didn't have any skin anymore. She didn't have any appearance anymore. She just became, for me, like consciousness.
And in fact, there are a couple of instances in the book, you mentioning skin, where, Claire, and then there was another character I remember, whose outer appearance you draw as if it's a skin or a suit that they can just step into and zip up.
Oh, yes. That's in the middle of the book. That was like the last scene that I drew in the book, even though it's in the middle. That was when I kind of, all the themes from the book kind of came together in my mind finally, because I didn't really plan it out too much. I decided to be very literal in my in the way I depicted that.
Well, you said just now that you didn't plan it out, at least at the very beginning, because I was wanting to ask you about the genesis of this project. I mean, where did the idea come, and was it something solid that you knew you wanted to write about, or did the story just evolve as you got into it?
The initial idea for an invisible girl came to me one day. It just kind of popped into my head, and then I wrote a 27-page script that I thought it would be like a 27-page story. And then the story started to kind of write itself, and I started to feel like I was entering this like dark tunnel with no light at the end, because I was like, oh God, this is not going to be 27 pages. This is going to be 150 pages. No, 160 pages. And it ended up being 220 pages. So, it was kind of like I lived through it as I was writing it.
Now, you mentioned some of the themes were there from the beginning. The way we see ourselves, vision, sight, I mean, those are prominent themes that I took away from my reading of Exits. That's something that I'm assuming you just, baked into the story.
Yeah, they were themes that I didn't consciously try to address. It was a very subconscious process. I felt like I was dreaming as I was drawing it.
And now that you mention this, it makes sense, because some of the images in the book, the way that certain patterns crop up again and again, it's very dreamlike, almost like a leitmotif. And I'm thinking about eyes, because sometimes you'll literally see someone's eyes, and then at other times you'll see in a panel an image where you have 2 points or 2 circles that, for all practical purposes, could be eyes. And so it's almost as if these images weave in and out of the story. Again, dreamlike.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm particularly fascinated by lucid dreams. That moment where you wake up in a dream and everything suddenly has this solidity to it, and clarity that wasn't, and it's like very subtle, but you're still asleep. And I sometimes get that way when I'm awake too. And in comics are kind of like lucid dreaming. And as for eyes, I guess the motif of eyes is that Claire kind of wakes up in her own life. She had been asleep, and she becomes, instead of being like the letter I, she becomes more of like a pair of eyes, because she no longer has like this visible identity in the world.
No longer becomes an object by which the people can see. And it's this, how do you describe them? This man-child chasing her down the street. That's the moment she becomes invisible. And so there she loses this kind of solid identity in a way, and then becomes just pure energy. Yeah, just seeing out. She becomes the observer. She becomes the one, almost the objectifier, right? I mean, maybe, I mean, it seems like a potentially feminist statement here. Someone who is objectified becomes invisible, but then acquires the power to go places and see certain things, and in many ways that gives her more control.
Sort of. I feel like she has struggles with controlling her having control over the situation. I saw her more as like just the energy and space between things, and it's the same energy that is the music of the comic and what kind of propelled the story forward for me. It wasn't as much based on like, oh, this is going to happen next. It was more based on like the rhythm of it, almost the rhythm of the events, and they became inseparable between, like, that rhythm became inseparable with Claire as a character, if that makes any sense at all.
Right. And, we were talking about control. There's another character in the book, a friend of hers, who becomes much more prominent toward the end. What's her name?
I wrote this book like 8 months ago. May.
May, yes.
May Morgan.
And May seems to be, I guess, a good way of putting it. She's a badass. She doesn't take mess.
Okay. But I think that May is way more optimistic about life and a little bit more psychologically integrated than Claire. Like she's more one with herself than Claire is. More like has more of a purpose in the world, I think. So. Yeah. What was your question about her?
No, that in terms of the character with the control, it seems to be more May. I mean, or at least Claire looks to May as someone who has it much more together than she has.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
And you were talking about the experience somewhat like a lucid dream. I guess if one could be invisible and walk around, that would almost be like a lucid dream, right?
Yeah. It would. When I was working on the book, I was walking dogs, so I kind of felt like that. Like this, I was walking around the city. I was in Philadelphia at the time, and like a lot of the scenes from the book are based on my time living there. And I felt like just this invisible presence, observing and like going into people's houses because I had to pick up the dogs, and got a lot of material from that. Yeah.
But you didn't break in like Claire.
Oh, no.
That you'll want to admit on mic.
No, I did not break in any houses.
And, getting back to the site motif, one of the things I really appreciated about Exits is the fact that your art style varies depending on the context and what Claire is seeing. So there are times where what she's observing appears a little more fuzzy, and your art reflects that. Other times where she actually does dream within the story, and your change in art, your slight shift in the style reflects that as well.
Oh, are you talking about like how I reveal the pencils underneath?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was something that I decided to do as I was editing, after I'd finished drawing the whole book. Because I felt like showing the pencils kind of reflected a more... it reflected more of like a subconscious state, because it wasn't as edited and clean, and you could see the smudges and all the lines that I was going to do, but then erased, and yeah.
So this book is now out, and it's for everyone to read, to pick up. They can check out on the Koyama Press website, on Amazon, or wherever they choose to get their books. But are you working on anything else right now that we can look forward to?
I haven't started it yet, but I don't even know if I want to say. I guess I'm interested in fairy tales right now. That's all I'm going to say. Okay.
So we can expect something fairy tale-like in the future. Actually, you can make the argument that there's something fairy tale-like about Exits.
Yes. Yeah. As I was writing Exits, I became obsessed with fairy tales, and that has continued, that obsession.
So are you going to any other cons to help publicize the new book?
Not that maybe I'm applying to TCAF.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, good luck with that, and also good luck here this weekend with Small Press Expo. It's a great book, Exits. Definitely check it out. Listeners, Daryl, thank you very much for being on the podcast.
Thank you.
And I'm talking with Sean O'Neill about his series Rocket Robinson. And Sean, what can you tell listeners who may not be familiar with your book?
Well, the Rocket Robinson series is a graphic novel series for young readers, and they're classic adventure stories. They're set in the 1930s, and Rocket Robinson is a 12-year-old American boy, and he has a pet monkey named Screech. Excuse me, and his best friend is a girl named Nuri that he meets in the first book, Rocket Robinson and the Pharaoh's Fortune. So in the first book, it all is set in Egypt, and they're trying to solve this mystery of an ancient pharaoh's treasure that's hidden somewhere in the city of Cairo. And then I have a brand new book out just this month that's just called Rocket Robinson and the Secret of the Saint. And in book 2, they're in Paris, and then once again, there's an ancient treasure. This one has to do with medieval knights and French history, and they end up in a castle trying to find the treasure there. So they're kind of fun, classic adventure stories.
It sounds like a lot of fun. Now, I have to ask you, how did you get the idea of, first of all, putting it in the 30s and the whole atmosphere around it?
Well, the idea was I wanted to make an adventure comic for young readers, and I'm really fascinated with history. So I wanted it to have some sort of historical element. And I thought about different ways that I could do that. Originally I thought maybe it would be fun to have them time travel, but then I decided I wanted them to exist in a set time but have references to the past. So the reason I set the books in the 30s is because I wanted it to exist not in the present, in some sort of past, to kind of capture that classic adventure feel, kind of like the old radio serials or the old, kind of. So, but it has, although the books take place in the 30s, they have a very contemporary feel, the way they're drawn and the way they're written.
It really sounds like a lot of fun and looks like a lot of fun. I was flipping through it. I was kind of reminded of Terry and the Pirates. Yeah. I wondered if that was kind of an influence.
Yeah, all of those things, Terry and the Pirates or Adventures of Tintin or, things like that. Really just the idea, I have children of my own and I really wanted to kind of create something that had just a sense of fun, had a sense of adventure. There is an opportunity for readers to learn a little something about history, but it's not school, it's not homework. It's a really fun comic.
So your second book has just come out, and how far do you plan to take it?
Well, I've done 2 so far. They're great fun to do. They're a lot of work, as all these comic creators at the show will tell you. But it's a labor of love, and so I'd like to keep the series going as long as I can. I've gotten really good response to the first 2 books. So as long as I can keep doing them, and as long as I enjoy doing them, I'm going to try to keep doing them.
That sounds good. Well, best of luck with the new book and all your other projects too.
All right, thanks a lot. It was great to meet you, and it was great to talk to you about
you too.
Book. All right.
So there you go, the interviews that Andy and I conducted at Small Press Expo 2016. I want to thank again John Martz, Jay Hosler, Blue Delliquanti, Ulises Fariñas, Storme Smith, Ted Stearn, Emma Glaze, Daryl Seitchik, and Sean O'Neill for talking with us for the podcast. Remember, this is the first of 3 on-location interview episodes, so be sure to check back in the coming days for the other 2 episodes. And we also suggest that you check out the website of our sponsor, which is Discount Comic Book Service. Go to dcbservice.com for unbelievable discounts on all your comics pre-ordering needs. And after you do check out DCB Service, get in touch with us and let us know what you think about our conversations from Small Press Expo. If you go to the website, comicsalternative.com, you'll find that you can leave us a voice message from the comfort of your own desktop or mobile computing device through SpeakPipe. Or you can call us the old-fashioned way. Our phone number is 415-3-COMICS. That's 415-326-6427. You can also email us. We're 2guys@comicsalternative.com, or you can contact me directly at derek@comicsalternative.com. You can also find us all over social media, such as on Twitter, Facebook, Tumblr, Instagram, Google+, Goodreads, Pinterest, and YouTube. You can subscribe to the podcast through iTunes. You can stream us on Stitcher. You can also find us on TuneIn, on Spotify, and on iHeartRadio. And if you're an Android user, via Google Play Music. But you can find every single one of our podcast episodes, as well as the reviews and the comics-related commentary that we post on our blog, simply by going to our website, comicsalternative.com. We've got more interviews from SPX lined up, so be sure to check back for those. Until then, I'm Derek. Take care.